Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us at the Michigan Historic Preservation Network's monthly webinar. Today's subject is Taking It to the Streets, Planting Seeds of Preservation Across Michigan. And this is today's December 8th, 2022. Using Zoom to maximize your participation, we ask if you'd like to ask questions, you can leave them in the Q&A box as you think of them. Forgive me. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you are having technical difficulties, please put those questions in the Q&A box as well. The Q&A box should be located in the bar at the bottom of your screen. If the bar disappears, hover your mouse and it will come back up. The chat window will contain links to resources discussed as needed. There may be polls that pop up during the webinar. Please take a moment to participate. Thank you and enjoy the webinar. Please participate in the survey after the webinar concludes. The Michigan Historic Preservation Network's mission is that we advocate for Michigan's historic places to contribute to our economic vitality, sense of place, and connection to the past. And we could not do this work without our members and volunteers. Please consider becoming a member and join us at mhpn.org. We'd also like to thank the Michigan Arts and Culture Council for their support in helping us bring this to you. Taking it to the streets, planting seeds of preservation across Michigan, presented by Jessica Flores, MSHP Lead GA, founder and principal of Preservation Forward, and MHPN board member. And just a second here, and we will do a new share here. And I'm sorry I have this up as a document. Jessica is founder and principal of Preservation Forward, a historic preservation consultancy specializing in economic development, adaptive reuse, and rehabilitation of historic buildings with a focus on traditional building trades and materials. Preservation Forward is about understanding the built environment as it relates to a place and the people who love their place. Previously, Jessica worked as a community outreach and historic building specialist for the Michigan State Historic Preservation Office, where she specialized in the environmental sustainability and rehabilitation of historic buildings. Jessica worked across the state of Michigan on all issues related to historic preservation. She holds a LEED professional accreditation from the USGBC and has a Master of Science degree in Historic Preservation from Eastern Michigan University, a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration from Ohio University, and an Associate of Applied Science degree in Hands-on Building Preservation and Construction Technology from Belmont College. Jessica has worked as a historic building pathologist and architectural historian on a variety of cultural resource management projects. Jessica has worked with hundreds of local government leaders, state agencies, developers, contractors, and involved stakeholders in order to strengthen the role of historic preservation in communities and downtowns. Jessica also brings forth a diverse background of preservation, public policy, knowledge, and leadership skills. She's worked on many local and state campaigns throughout her home state of West Virginia. She's a faculty member at the School of Planning, Design, and Construction at Michigan State University. She is vice chair of the East Lansing Historic District Commission, and she's lobbied on Capitol Hill to convince federal legislators of the importance for appropriate legislation to preserve our nation's history. And I will hand this off to you, Jessica.
Thanks so much, Chris, for that warm welcome. I really appreciate being here today and sharing my afternoon here with the MHPN. And thank you again to Makaka and MHPN for having me this afternoon. I will share my screen and we'll get to it.
You should have, there we are.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to make, you can't see my small little toolbar here, can you? I'm going to make it small there. Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jessica Flores, and I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon. And so let's take it to the streets and talk about historic preservation across Michigan. Now, let me make certain I can forward my slides. I always like to start out any presentation that I give with this slide. I think that it's very important, and I actually like to have it in front of any audience that's willing to listen. And what we're kind of striving for in the world of historic preservation in Michigan and beyond is really to get to the sweet spot. The sweet spot is the purpose, the red area of this Venn diagram. And I feel like if I could get the opportunity to share this with you today, that you really take a moment and pause and look at these intersections here, your passion, your mission, your profession, and your vocation. I feel like I'm amongst preservation peers here today, hopefully maybe some new preservation newbies joining our webinar this afternoon, that this is what historic preservation is all about. And I feel like it's a calling, and the red center part of the Venn diagram is where we all want to be. We feel great about doing the work. We love it. The world needs it. And hopefully we're paid for it. Anytime that I get the opportunity, I also share this with my students at Michigan State so that they can see this is ultimately where we want to be. We want to be giving back. I call it, in reference to the book, The Go-Giver. Let's give back to our community and to our built environment. So no one has ever seen this photo before, and I was a little bit hesitant to share it, but today I'm supposed to be sharing with you what it's like to be a preservationist in Michigan, just working in the field of preservation in the trenches every day. This is me in 2016, and I was 2 months out from having had our third child, my son, so about 8 weeks out, and I started Preservation Forward in our basement. And this is a regular old fold-up table. I had left my awesome position at the State Historic Preservation Office, loved my role there, really enjoyed working alongside with my preservation colleagues, but felt that I had a bigger mission in my career, and that I had a little bit more of that go-giving to give back to the state and beyond. So this is little old Preservation Forward when it started in 2016. The one quote I wanted to think about when I shared this photo with you is, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? Preservation needed to be more strategies, more targeted historic preservation activity. And I felt like it when I was still at the SHPO that I wasn't able to do everything that I needed to do. So that I essentially needed to launch something and create something where I could go out and help communities and kind of change a little bit of the dynamics for historic preservation in the state. And we'll get a little bit further into that as we get along here this afternoon. Something else that I want you to know is that Michigan we're rich in diversity, socioeconomic, rich in building materials, rich in our communities. No two communities are the same. They're very different. So we have very different dynamics from the Upper Peninsula, even up into the Keweenaw Peninsula, down into Metro Detroit. We have different needs around preservations. We have different successes and strengths and weaknesses and threats. But Michigan, together collectively, I truly feel like historic preservation is a patchwork. We're this large, colorful quilt here in Michigan, and together we piece together a patchwork for preservation across the state. And I'm thankful to have worked in 83 counties across the state and really get to sense of what the pulse of preservation is in Michigan. So preservation is very personal, and I think that's why I felt like I needed to launch Preservation Forward. I wanted to get out and be boots on the ground in different communities and see what each community was up to doing. What was their messaging in historic preservation? So just some images from the field. and travels over the last six years and about 4 months that I've been running Preservation Forward. But preservation is personal because it connects us to our places. It connects us to people. And so really preservation is the story of people in place. And I also like to say that preservation is a connection to our built environment. It's a tangible connection. You can touch it and feel it. You can see the building traditions and skills within the masonry, within how the plaster was laid, within all the different decoration of buildings, even within our cultural landscapes. And that's something I can't think of another kind of artwork that is a tangible connection that we can touch. I got to thinking earlier this morning, well, maybe food. We eat a lot of our heritage too, right? But the future, what I want you to think about today in preservation and kind of the direction that I see historic preservation going is in placekeeping. So what's placekeeping? Well, according to the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, placekeeping, and let me move this up here, collapse my bar here, is creative placemaking has come into usage as a counter to placemaking. So before, I feel about in 2010 to 2020, we've been talking a whole lot about placemaking, making a place. Well, that's not really historic preservation. We already have the place in situ. It's already existing. How do we keep that, maintain it, preserve it, the longevity of historic preservation? And then another kind of tangent I'm going to share with you later today is the life cycle of preservation. But let's keep back with placekeeping. It's the active care and maintenance of a place. It's social fabric by the people who live and work there. It's not just preserving buildings, but keeping the cultural memories associated with the locale alive, while supporting the ability of local people to maintain their way of life as they choose. Now, historic preservation is not always above ground. It's also below ground, right? So anytime that I'm starting to think about a place in the context of a place, the landscape, the buildings, I also will lean on for the expertise of my below ground historic preservation colleagues that are archaeologists and that can kind of shed light on, well, what is going on in the context below ground and how does that connect with what's above ground? This is all under the umbrella of placekeeping, and it really intersects with preservation. Okay, I'm having a moment here. So a day in the life of a historic preservationist, always under the umbrella of education. Any opportunity I get, whether it's a social media post, a telephone call, an email, an on-site visit to read a historic building or walk a historic downtown with community members, I take advantage of that. Education seems to be the constant need for more messaging around how do we take care of our historic and cultural resources. And then it kind of falls into 3 different categories that I handle on a daily basis. So placekeeping is management and planning. We need to manage what we have and plan for our historic buildings. Survey, identification and designation. How do we survey what we have? Often I'll get a phone call, Jessica, we have a few historic buildings. They're very deteriorated. A couple of them are being threatened with demo. We need you to help us identify what we have. So we survey them. We survey what we have above ground. I'll lean on my below ground colleagues for how do we assess what kind of potential archaeological resources, survey, known recorded historic resources that are below ground. But the other silo is the economics. We can't do preservation without the money, right? So I've kind of become pretty fluent in where do we find the money for preservation. So falling under placekeeping, kind of management and planning, we look at a lot of different resources and communities. Now brace yourselves, I'm about to fly through a lot of photos. I'm a visual person. I love to see historic photos. I love to share them. And I like to see opportunities for, look at this through a bifocal lens, look at it through a preservationist lens, and then look at it through maybe an economic development lens. They must happen together collectively. They have a symbiotic relationship. We need to have the money to execute our historic preservation activities. So this is a snapshot of 3 small buildings that I posted actually on social media about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and is now in contract for a purchase. And this is in lovely Warren on the Van Dyke corridor. We'll come back to Warren later. Pix Theater here in Lapeer, Lapeer is a Main Street community. I'm going to give you some designations as we whip through some of these photos. Lovely Mayville, think in the thumb, Tuscola County. Take a trip to Mayville if you get the chance. A lot of cute historic resources. Negaunee in the Upper Peninsula, about 7 miles west of Marquette in western Marquette County, recently listed in the National Register, on its way to adopting a local historic district ordinance. Great things happening in Negaunee. These are just some of my pictures from the road that I want to share with you. I kind of feel like Jack Kerouac writing my adventures from the streets. I'm blessed to be able to see a lot of Michigan and share this with you. Three Rivers, Main Street Community, Historic Theater. Sault Ste. Marie, eastern side of the Upper Peninsula. We have Alpena here, the State Theater in downtown Alpena. Lovely Depot Town, National Register listed, local historic district, Ypsilanti. Ironwood Theater, way up in the most western city in the Upper Peninsula, Ironwood, Michigan. Marshall, Michigan, listed in the National Register of Historic Places. This is the Grand River Brewery. Grand Ledge, I believe eligible to be listed in the National Register. And I just took this about this fall, earlier this fall, and I thought, look at this Oddfellows Hall. I want you to know that not everything is perfectly pristine. I actually like it when a building is a little bit gritty and not perfectly manicured. That means there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity for education. There's an opportunity for economic development and continuing the story of that historic resource, that placekeeping. So you can see that even with this small little Oddfellows Hall that's now office space on the first floor, it's being transitioned somewhat. New windows, yes, but it really still maintains a lot of its bones. So look at it with your bifocals. That two lens, preservation, economic development. Marquee Theater, downtown Northville, just had a full facade structural repair on the exterior, listed in the National Register as a contributing structure in a local and National Register historic district and undergoing future rehabilitation efforts. This is noteworthy here because downtown Northville has also just created a social district, and this is part of the social district. And this theater is going to have a unique connection with the streetscape and the social district. So people can come into the theater, have a drink, see a show, walk the boundaries of the social district, and it's really going to have a community-wide impact. That's important. Survey identification and designation. So remember, oftentimes you might just need to know, well, what do we have in our community? Maybe we need Jessica to come out or another historic preservationist, just assess. I really love to read old buildings. I kind of like to say that sometimes I'm the building whisperer. I like to see what the problems are, assess them, and we're going to kind of get to that a little bit later. But truly, the baseline, the framework for all future preservation efforts is survey. So, well, why would a community want to survey? Well, it helps to say, well, do we want to have our downtown listed in the National Register? The National Register is the gateway to the federal historic tax credits. It helps to survey local ordinances. Do we want to have an ordinance to protect our historic resources, to plan for them? Should new development happen? Do we want to have design guidelines for infill construction? Sometimes surveys help to lead to facade studies. What facades are in disrepair? What facades need immediate stabilization needs? Marketing analysis, sometimes surveys are for marketing. Where's our vacancies in our historic buildings? Okay, what commercial storefronts are vacant that we could place a tenant or make a plan for? Sometimes surveys are for guidebooks or brochures as well. And then these are kind of my three favorite things to bring together and marry. And that's planning, zoning, and preservation application. These three, kind of being a practitioner together of preservation, I like to really bring into my circle the planning and zoning specialists in a community. Communities can prioritize their historic preservation activities when they have a master plan in place that considers historic preservation. Adopting a local historic district ordinance. It can be kind of the beginning of a National Register nomination to get your buildings listed in the National Register. National Register listing is honorific. It's not regulatory. local historic district ordinances, sorry about that, local historic district ordinance adoption has a regulatory component, but it's to protect what you have. We'll get into that a little bit later, but that's a huge distinction. That's probably one of the most common questions that I get. Jessica, should we adopt the local historic district ordinance? Should we pass that? Identify boundaries for local historic district? Or should we go for the national? Well, let's talk about it. What's the best, where are you at in your community, and what's your preservation ethos? So community organizations often work with their planning and zoning officials so that they can develop heritage tourism, educational programming. Also, we want to make certain that we're considering preservation ordinances that are favorable and play well with planning and zoning efforts. So sometimes we have to go and refer back to, well, what's the legislation that made historic preservation possible? What all goes back to our National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. If you don't think that I refer to this on a daily basis, then you'd be incorrect. I'm always going to, well, what's the act say? What are we doing? What's the activity that you want to do for historic preservation? Are you having federal dollars because you're having a sidewalk put into your community? Okay, well, then we need to consider historic resources. But the part of the act, and I'm not going to read this verbatim, is that it passed legislation to preserve our nation's historic properties, establish a partnership with the federal government, state, tribal, local governments. It created our state historic preservation offices, tribal historic preservation offices, and it was also the first, it's called the first historic preservation to address historic preservation issues. It created the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. That's kind of in a nutshell. An important part to think about is a section of the act. If you're there's a lot of ARP funds, the Recovery Act funds that are coming into our state here in Michigan for infrastructure projects. So if you're having any federal dollars that are coming in for a building rehab or a street expansion, sidewalk replacement, then it falls under what we call Section 106. This is a huge component of historic preservation activity in the state, especially right now. So anytime that projects are receiving federal assistance, approval, funding, permitting, licensure, their effects on historic properties and listed or eligible for listing in the National Register are reviewed. So like I said, infrastructure projects. So that's an important part of this is that when 106 is triggered when you're having federal dollars go into a project. So let me give you a real world example of this. If Chris owns his own building in Old Town Lansing and he wants to do something with it and he's using his own money and there's no designations, he can do what he wants to do to that building. If he's using federal grant dollars on his building, even without any designations, he will still go through Section 106 and have a consultation with our State Historic Preservation Office. This can get a little bit complicated, and I don't want to take up all of our time of our webinar, but I'm happy to talk to anyone offline that might be going through this process right now and uncertain about it. The National Register of Historic Places. So are you familiar with this plaque? Sometimes you see it on buildings across Michigan. Well, what is the National Register? And here I have the lovely the orphanage outside of Marquette here that's been lovingly rehabilitated. But the National Register is the official list of our country's historic buildings, districts, sites, structures, and objects worthy of preservation, established in part of the NHPA of 1966, overseen by our colleagues at the National Park Service. Local historic districts here, local historic districts are protections that are favorable for preservation, planning, and placekeeping. So East Lansing, we have several residential. I live in East Lansing. I'm the vice chair of the East Lansing Historic District Commission, and we have several neighborhoods that are our historic districts here. We have a variety of architectural types and diverse neighborhoods in East Lansing, and we have protections so that if anything, any new development happens or pressure from development, we review those. Building changes. This is one of the kind of teeth of preservation. So if you have a local historic district in your community or you're thinking about adopting one, that's really where the carrot and the stick meet. So essentially, that's where your local community will review projects, building activities that happen within your local historic district. And there's incentives attached to that. Well, a couple of the incentives are state historic tax credits in Michigan. We just had those reinstated in December of 2020 and rolled out in June of 2022, this last summer. And also you'll notice that a lot of the property values are maintained and the investments are protected in our local historic districts. So this is a screenshot taken from our State Historic Preservation Office. Well, how many local historic districts do we have? I'm just curious, right? We want to see a snapshot. About 80. And this could have changed. This might be dated maybe a year or so, but about 80 in Michigan have a local historic district ordinance. And that means that they have a commission that meets once a month reviewing building activities in their local historic district. So for instance, why would you want to establish one? Because it protects your historic opera house from being demoed, somebody just coming in and deciding to demo it, or maybe you have an infill structure and it's proposed to be a pole barn. You know, there's some design guidelines that are in place. So your local historic district's pretty important to protecting your historic resources. I always say it's smart planning and preservation at the end of the day that's going to get us through and maintain that placekeeping. So at the local level, we have our Public Act 169, Michigan's local historic district ordinance, and designating an area as a local historic district is one of the few ways a community can provide legal protection for its historic resources. Don't want an Arby's right in the middle of your downtown? Have a local historic district ordinance that will protect those historic resources. So here's a snapshot that I like to show. And if you can see at the top, it's the National Register of Historic Places in local historic districts. Does designation protect the property? So in a nutshell, the area around the red is the most important. Listing in the National Register is honorific. There's no regulatory, okay? Some of the buildings I showed you on those slides are listed in the National Register, but not locally protected. So really anybody could do anything that they wanted with them, except that they're using those federal grant dollars I talked about. Local historic district does provide legal protection by requiring that proposed work affecting the exterior be reviewed by a local historic district commission, okay? We are cold water. So this is just another, I'm kind of a transitional slide here to show you that we are always expressing our heritage, our history. We talk about our history. We collectively unify around the history of a place. And people often, I was speaking with a community the day before yesterday, were saying, we have a Heritage Day festival, yet, and we celebrate our heritage, but we really don't know how to put the preservation wheels in motion for how to protect these resources. This is where we start to think about, well, are there incentives for protection? Well, there are incentives for redevelopment. So they fall into usually these categories. And this is that final kind of silo that I was talking about earlier is, where's the money? How do we get the money to rehab? Well, it usually falls into these categories: tax credits, local incentives like facade dollars, a little bit of money for paint or facade grants, low interest loans, and grants. Of these categories, federal grants are generally only made to nonprofit and government entities. So that's a federal grant. But at the local and state levels here in Michigan, well, we have a lot of good resources and tools in our toolbox for preservation. We have economic development agencies at the state level, our Department of Transportation. We have MDARD for bringing farmers' produce into historic buildings, into restaurants that are occupying historic storefront. So we have a lot of synergy happening around preservation, and sometimes it just takes someone to hone these pieces together, okay? So importantly, the other question I'm asked quite a bit is about our federal historic tax credit. So we have a federal credit across the country, and there's no cap on that credit, and it's 20% of your qualified rehab expenses, okay? So if you're doing $1 million rehab on the Riviera Theater here, then that means that you can come back and receive a credit of 20% of those overall rehab expenditures, okay? Usually it's anything that you're gonna do that's permanently attached to the building, you can get a tax credit for. We also have our newly reinstated state historic tax credits. And that's 25% of the overall rehab expenditures. So a couple things. Now the property must be listed in the National Register, the state listed as a state historic site, in a local historic district, individually listed or contribute to a local historic district in order to qualify as a candidate for our state historic tax credits, what are 25%. It is competitive and it is capped at $5 million. It took a couple years and a small task force to get this reinstated. We did have it in 2011. Governor Snyder eliminated that in December of 2011. We got it back a decade later. 2020, Governor Whitmer reinstated it. It was rolled out June 15th of 2022 of this year. It can be combined with our federal historic tax credits. Federal's not capped. This one is capped. But I'm begging you, here's the thing. We need to show that this is an important tool for downtown revitalization across Michigan. And then maybe only we will be able to have that cap lifted when we show that it's successful. Residential, this is important. Our residential homeowners are able to apply for this. So if you have a home in a local historic district, this is that real teeth to having being a part of a local historic district, having a contributing home, because the federal is only for income producing properties, commercial properties, and the local is for residential and commercial. 3 silos. I don't want to occupy all of our time with this, but I want you to know that this is being recorded and that you'll have access to these slides. Additional financial incentives. Sometimes people forget there's always some change in the couch cushions. So let's go and poke around a little bit. So we have the National Park Service, the National Trust. We have our friends, our state agencies here, MISHDA, the State Housing Development Authority, the Michigan Economic Development Authority, and our MDOT, our friends there. We have the MHPN that has low interest loans. They also have stabilization dollars for immediate stabilization. If you have a building that's partially coming down or has needs of immediate stabilization to get through the winter time here in Michigan, we have our new markets tax credit, low income housing tax credits for residential. If you're creating a multifamily residential housing project or redevelopment project, you can use LIHTC funds, tax credits. We have our CLG program here, facilitated by the State Historic Preservation Office and led by the State Historic Preservation Office in partnership with the National Park Service. Lighthouse Assistance Program. If you are on a lakeshore and you have a lighthouse, there's assistance there and grants. 1772 Foundation, Americana Foundation, Michigan Architectural Foundation, Consumers Energy, thank you. And Jackson is a generous donor and friend to historic preservation. Showing a little bit more artwork on the exterior of a building here, Muskegon. I said that I would talk about reading old buildings, and this is kind of my real area of interest. So I often say that I am, my medium is just historic buildings. I love people and I love to help people. And I just feel like the way that I can help them is through being a steward of their historic built environment and just kind of helping guide them. So I'll say stop, assess, and address. I was out on the site in Mount Pleasant looking at the stone house, and I was assessing the existing building conditions. You diagnose building problems, prioritize immediate concerns to long-term preservation sustainability needs. So what do I like to do? Well, I like to read old buildings, and I like to walk through and look at them with you. So if you have a bunch of buildings in your downtown and you really don't know kind of where to start, then I'd love to come out and look at your buildings. I'm often on my project sites, working with the tradespeople, looking at things like structural cracks. How do we address these? How do we stabilize a building for future efforts? Maybe we can't redevelop or rehabilitate the building all at once, but we have to incrementally rehabilitate and we have to intervene. Well, we can do a little Band-Aid for a short period of time to get us through when we're able to do a full-on rehab. Just pointing at a little bit of wrong masonry here, Portland cement here, concrete that has gone into the wrong mortar joint and it's caused severe cracking, spalling. if you like to look at old building problems and get your hands dirty and pull your shirt sleeves up, then I'm your person. I like to look at a lot of things and figure out, well, how can we mitigate this? So just looking at when the fire skin on a brick comes off and it crumbles, it has incompatible mortar. How do we address these things? Sometimes I feel like this is a huge part of preservation that's not getting the word out. And we really need to encourage young people to go into the trades, to get the message out about the importance of the trades. And so that's kind of another interest in my work in Preservation Forward, is partnering with tradespeople and the important role that they play in Michigan and beyond. We can't afford to not act on behalf of our built environment. The time is now, and we can't afford for another day to go by. So if you're thinking we should do something about our buildings and our communities, the time is probably right now. And I'm often looking at the cost of building materials, the cost of our changes in our interest rates rising, and looking at the impact of that, our economy, onto the built environment. Thankfully, right now, most of the money that's coming into our state is actually for historic building renovation or just existing building renovation, not new construction. So we got a little leg up as preservationists when we want to rehab. So I like to look at preservation wins. And here's an example of Tibbetts Opera House in Coldwater, a reconstruction, looking at historic photo documentation and plans of what it looked like historically. And then this was taken last week in Coldwater, and Tibbetts Opera House is quite stunning. I encourage you to go down, and we know that Coldwater is in the south central off of US 12 portion of our state. Bring your attention to some preservation challenges that we're facing. This is in Warren, in the Warren Village Historic District here. And this is on Mound Road. And so some challenges that Warren is facing is that if you're familiar with Mound Road, southeastern Michigan, Warren's the second biggest city in Michigan, and the speed limits have been increased on Mound Road. They fly through in this small little village historic district that's about maybe 10 to 12 historic resources. And what do? They have some gems, some great single-story mid-century buildings, and but they have nearly a highway going through their community. So it's a challenge. How do we slow traffic down? How do we get ahead of things like large billion-dollar road projects and not considering our historic resources and what's going to happen with them? How do we keep that sense of community and that kind of tie to our history when we feel like we are a transient community? So Warren is really kind of on my radar. I'm working with them and concerned about them and want to help them. There's some great little neighborhoods that jut off adjacent to Warren. So just wanted to bring this as a challenge, but it's something we're working through. And then a thread I want to bring your attention to today, and this is in Livonia. This is the Alfred Nobel Library in Livonia. It's the southern part of Livonia, closer to, let me think. What do I want to say? It's closer to, I forget the section, but anyways, if you're familiar with it, throw me a message in the chat. But Alfred Nobel, designed by internationally recognized modern architect Gunnar Birkitz. And so this is slated for demolition. This is something I want to bring on your radar. This is very intimately connected with the community. And if they lost this historic resource, no designations that we're aware of right now. This just came on my radar on Friday afternoon, but it's important enough that I wanted to bring it to your attention and kind of spread the seed here of awareness for we could lose this modern library in Livonia that is connected with a neighborhood school and park and playground and residential neighborhood. So I wanted to bring that to your radar today. So every day is your chance to make this city a little better. What are you going to do to help out historic preservation in your community? And if I can help you out, I'm happy. And even if it's just being a vehicle to a liaison between a community member and a city council person, or a historic district commission member and a planning staff person, I want to be that. So, And then I had mentioned how it's going. Well, things are going really well. I did get rid of my my fold-up table in 2016. I have gotten my secondhand steel case table here from Michigan Surplus Store, but I am still working out of my house, which I love, and I'm on the streets and communities all around Michigan, giving advice to Governor Whitmer on what's happening, the pulse of preservation, and the seeds that are being planted for preservation across the state. And then I'm super proud to share that in 2021, Preservation Forward was part of the redevelopment team and received a building award from the Michigan Historic Preservation Network for the Peabody Block in Albion, Michigan. So just started an idea out in 2016 on a whim and a hope, and things are going really well. And I am happy to help out the next preservationist decide to take a chance on their own. One thing I wanted to leave you with today is the more we can envision a community we want to live in, the more we will be inspired to move toward it. So you got to tell your story. Where are you from? Impact lives, help other people, be a go-giver, and nurture the past. Thank you so very much for having me this afternoon, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. We've got a few questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
And our first anonymous attendee wanted to thank you and tell you that everything looked great. Your presentation was good.
Thanks.
Second one is, do you feel that your educational background and your time at SHPO prepared you well to start your own business? What recommendations would you give to someone who wants to start their own consulting business?
I would, one, I think that yes, absolutely. I really got to get a sense of what was happening from a higher level of perspective when I was at the SHPO. I had all these awesome colleagues that specialized in different areas of historic preservation that I could lean on and tap into and ask questions. And I got to look at the impact of a lot of different federal projects, state projects across the state. So yes, it was undoubtedly a great time that I had at SHPO, learned a ton. Another part is the hands-on. My background is in the historic building trades. And so without that, that has been probably one of the most important facets of my education, is being able to talk to tradespeople on job sites, understanding, looking at plans, understanding how to read specifications for a project. And that, I think, is probably just as, if not more important than my time at the SHPO, was my time at trade school and working in the field while I was in trade school.
Sure.
You learn while being on the job. So if you're interested in starting your own firm, I'd be happy to talk to you. You learn when you're out in the streets and you see what the needs are of community members.
All right. Thank you. Next question is, with more people working from home and staying in their communities during the workday, are you finding this is revitalizing for the towns in which you're working? Or maybe perhaps the question more appropriately is that those communities with more remote workers are finding that that revitalizes because they're not taken somewhere else during their workday.
Right. Well, I'm kind of the adage that let's work on a community or revitalize a community, placekeeping in a community for those that live there first and foremost before tourists. So you often hear about, we'll make it a nice place and people will want to come and enjoy our community. Well, I think we're putting the cart before the horse. We need to work, we need to extend our grace and our appreciation and our investment in those who live there. So if they've decided to live in your community, they're living in Niles, Three Rivers, Bay City, let's take care of those at home first and invest in our community first. I don't know if I'm answering that quite well, but people are staying in place, but they're also traveling. So I do see people traveling to a lot of different Michigan communities to get different experiences, and every community kind of needs to think, what kind of experience are we providing for those who live here and those who might want to come here? If we make it nice enough for people to live here, then the people will eventually come there. I hope I'm answering that question right.
No, I think that's an excellent answer. Because really, why are we doing this? and I think it's definitely, we're interested in the place that we live enough that the tourism that comes in because of that is almost a side issue. Make it a beautiful place, a place that has, that meaning and that history. It draws people into these downtowns. They don't even know it. It's an emotional thing that that is there already. But the
Right.
secondary part is for the tourism. That's the economic development sort of multiplier. But I think it's important that your point is well made, that we do it for the people that live there. The people that live there do it for themselves.
They've already invested in your community. Let's take care of them, right?
Right.
They've already said, we like it here. We bought a house or we have an apartment here.
Mhm.
So how can we continue that and keep them in your community, retain them?
Exactly. Christopher Werner asks, how do you effectively promote the importance of maintenance to any building when the owner struggles economically? So many school districts and businesses prefer to ignore maintenance, get a bond passed, and tear down and rebuild rather than continuously maintain what they have.
I think a line item in that, not going for the bond, but thinking about your master plan or your school plan and having a line item that is an appropriation for the maintenance of your buildings. Easier said than done. I realize that when people really are kind of salivate over new buildings and either consolidating or just new buildings for neighborhood schools, thinking that neighborhood historic schools are obsolete. That's a question that you have to come to as a community. Have these buildings fulfilled their life cycle? Is there an alternative to demolition? Could they be, and I'm kind of going out, Christopher, I'm sorry, could they be a business incubator, a maker space area, apartments, anything other than demolition? And we can form arguments for why to retain those buildings, retain them as a school and not go to new construction. We can make an argument for how do we retain these buildings for another use other than their original use. And then the other thing is the absolute last thing is deconstruction. And that's something I didn't take time to show in a slide today, but is the deconstruction of buildings, is establishing, adopting an ordinance for if a building has achieved its lifespan, how do we enforce an ordinance for gently deconstructing and not just sending the landfill, the waste to a landfill or construction demolition waste, but actually deconstructing and using those materials for another building or repurposing them to fix up another existing building in your community. Deconstruction is a huge new facet of historic preservation. MSU is spearheading an effort called domicology. They coined the term, coming out of the Center for Community and Economic Development at MSU. If you haven't heard of domicology yet, it's the life cycle of buildings. And how do you go through gently dismantling buildings and deconstructing? I know I took it to a whole other level, but I'd love to talk to you about that.
My old house had a lot of different previously used timbers that, had mortises let in and et cetera. And that's what the traditional way that we did that. We didn't just burn those timbers or bury them. We put them into another building. And I think the important point is that the most sustainable building is the one you don't demolish or that you don't demolish. If we can keep demolition from happening, I'll be a happy camper.
Now, the final thing, there was a building demoed either yesterday or this morning in Owasso. I'm torn about. Never consider deconstruction. If it had to come down, it suffered fire damage, full disclosure, a couple of years back. If you all are anyone from Owasso, you know what I'm talking about. Those bricks could have been used, and there's 3 other historic rehab projects going on Owasso, could have utilized some of those building components. It's got to start to have larger long-term vision for our preservation. Preservation is not just happening in things are not evolving and changing. We're kind of at the forefront. This is the new sector of building construction. It's a big deal now. It's not just I hate to say it, it's not just preserving what's in a house museum. This is at the forefront of building construction. If you don't think it, then you're going to fall behind.
Exactly. Moving on, Janet Krieger. Thank you, Janet, for joining us. SHPO is going to be doing an entire track of programming at MHPN's 43rd annual statewide conference on Mackinac Island from May 11th to 13th next year, 2023. If you'd like to learn about more about the National Register, Section 106, local ordinances, archaeology, and more, please attend. Registration will be opening in February. Thank you, Janet. An anonymous attendee asks, do you feel that smaller Michigan communities are taking full advantage of what the U.S. Department of Agriculture offers in terms of financial assistance and guidance? Often this is through the local extension office.
Great question. USDA has our rural development grants and other programming that is favorable for preservation. USDA grants. My first project, remember that fold-up table, was writing a historic preservation plan for the village of Marcellus down in Cass County, southwestern Michigan. Sadly, it was they had just lost a beautiful historic can't remember if it was an opera house or a hotel. It's been some years ago, but they called me after the fact. That's how a lot of preservation happens. We lost one thing and we're not going to have it happen again. But they got a small grant to develop a plan for the future of their village because of they had that tremendous loss. And so that grant was through the USDA. USDA doing excellent work, tap into the rural development, and it's favorable to our smaller populations, small, medium-sized communities in Michigan.
Exactly. Moving on, Michael Muma, and I hope I get the pronunciation right on that, asks, with so many landfills reaching capacity and communities not wanting new landfills in their backyard, has the preservation field developed ways to tap into this to gain new supporters of preservation and reuse of old structures? And I think you had already, I think, addressed that pretty clearly, that dome ecology is the way to go.
Deconstruction. I will tell you, want to plug for my fellow preservation colleagues in the San Antonio, the Office of Deconstruction, Historic Preservation in the city of San Antonio are doing pioneering efforts for deconstruction. Look them up. They're amazing. I need to go down and learn from those folks.
That was an article in New York Times recently, I think, that dealt with that specific municipality and what they're doing. That's awesome.
Huge stuff. Look up San Antonio.
All right. John Williams asks, do you know if preservation credits might apply to pristine UP land that is partially a wetland? And does this question make any sense?
Historic tax credits are only for a built structure. So if it's a vacant land, you'll have to utilize other maybe grant incentives or opportunities if you're wanting to put something on a wetland, and working with our friends at DEQ and Eagle to get the correct permit processes in place and any opportunities that you might have.
That sounds a lot like farmland preservation and purchase of development rights realms that question brings up.
Correct.
Yeah. And moving on, another anonymous attendee, Jessica, since you're at MSU, have you started hearing about MSU's FIT program? It stands for First Impressive Tourism. Planners are invited into a community to review a community's assets that could be used to attract visitors. I hear that FIT is not really emphasizing historic resources, and might we be able to change that? What are your thoughts?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I have heard about the FIT program, and I need to tap and bend the ear of my colleagues in the urban planning, regional planning program, and get them to consider our historic resources. Sometimes it takes planting that seed when people it's not right on their periphery. I live and breathe and everything is preservation, but when you're not in that, right, having it at the forefront, you have to have a gentle little guidance. And so, yes, thank you for that nugget, and I will follow up with FIT.
Excellent. Our previous questioner wants to comment and is complimenting you on fabulous work. John Warner.
Thank you.
Williams, I'm sorry. What tools exist to try to preserve an historic building that is not registered, but beloved by the community once it's already in the hands of private developers? Perhaps people don't realize there will be a removal ahead of time. Can the local government or citizens or the state intervene?
Okay, so a building is in the hands, I have to take a step back and put the pieces together. So a building is in the hands of a private owner. It currently has no designations, and there's a sense that it could be demoed down the road. Is that what we're saying? And that there's people that are concerned about the future of this building. I'm kind of reading that. Am I thinking that back correctly, Chris? I think
yes.
So.
Building that's beloved by the community once it's already in the hands of a private developer. What are the opportunities that you have, or what are the things you're going to run up against if you do want to preserve that building?
There's no designations. One, make sure you do your homework and make certain that you look at, is there any local, national designations online? You can go to your local municipality and see if there's any maps to see if it has any local historic district designation. 2, you can go to the National Register of Historic Places database and see if it's listed in the National Register. I always say do all your work to make certain that before you go and assemble your small task force, that you have made certain that there's no designations on the building, because that's where a little bit of you might have a little leg to stand on. If there is nothing and it is a beloved building, then that's where the old-fashioned grassroots advocacy comes out. Okay, preservation is called the grassroots. It starts at the local level. You love something, you start to build together. We had this happen. I think Allen Park just lost their historic building, Royal Oak, I think, or historic theater. Is that Royal Oak is about to lose a historic theater? This is where you band together and the voice is loud. You have to show up to council meetings. You can't just write emails. I know they say write an email. Who knows if they'll read it? You have to show up in masses and assemble. Same with the Alfred Noble Library. We don't believe there's any designations right now for that. And there's a small task force getting the message out on social media. A little pressure on the private building owner. And number one, education to that building owner. Here's what's available to you should you want to go down the route of rehabilitation. This is a beloved building. So it's a little bit of pressure, a little bit of advocacy, and a whole lot of education. And always no shaming anyone. We want to continue that building for the long term, the betterment of the community. It's in the hands of a private owner. Work with them, be gentle, guide them, give some education first.
And I think it's important to know the history. You had alluded to this, but a lot of times a community has to lose a resource before they realize what the whole group of resources are within a community. I mean, the classic history there is the loss of the Penn Station in New York City, and led to the subsequent support and maintenance, or not maintenance, but support for keeping Union Station in place in New York City. Sometimes that's what the community needs, is that wake-up call. It's unfortunate, but know the history, realize that happens time and again, and maybe you can pull an end around on that.
I can list 5 off the top of my head, phone calls after the fact. Lost a building, can't lose it again. What do we do, Jessica?
Exactly.
And then rally our preservation colleagues at MHPN and the SHPO. The SHPO can't really do any advocacy.
You've got to have your planning commission on board, because HDCs happen through the planning process. That's what gives, they have the authorization has teeth, but it's got to be part of your master plan. You have to go step by step through this process.
And
So,
like Warren, yeah, they have a new master plan as of 2021 and the historic district plan as of 2022. And part of that master plan was a chapter on historic preservation. They desperately want to. They would love to be a Coldwater with all the beautiful resources there and not having Mound Road going through their community. But they have what they have. Let's work with what you have. But at least they're saying we're sticking our neck out and being stewards of preservation. We have a chapter on our master plan and we're effectively using this plan. I get passionate, Chris. I got to dial it back.
moving forward, another anonymous attendee asks, do you think that Michigan's Main Street communities have a head start on integrating historic preservation into their economic revitalization plan? It certainly seems that way. And I'll open that up to you. What are your thoughts about that? I know I mentioned regularly in my advocacy work that, you know, we work with the Michigan Main Street program and we work with CLGs, and that preservation is a pillar of economic development in the downtown setting. So I say, yes, it helps you. But again, we're stepping back to that last conversation. Preservation with a historic district needs to happen through your planning department. And it's, you know, the authorizations are pretty clear. There's a process and you need to go through that. What are your thoughts?
I really echo what you're saying, Chris. Couple things. There's 4 main points of the Main Street program, and one of those points is historic preservation. And you really have to have the synergy of all 4 to make the Main Street program a success. If your community is not going to adopt all 4 as their Bible, then I don't think it's going to work. I have an excellent community in the northern portion of Michigan, in the northern lower peninsula, that has all the 4 pillars going for it, Main Street community, but is recently pulled out of the Main Street program, doing a lot of this activity, and they're not, how do I want to say this? They're not being, I think that they felt like they had gotten what they needed from the Main Street program, and I think it as a big loss. That's all I'm going to say about that. But I think that if you've already adopted the Main Street
Model.
Main Street, right, envision that you are already saying preservation is important, because the backbone of the Main Street program is historic preservation, the foundation of it. So that's already saying, yes, we care about it. We are concerned about our historic resources.
Exactly.
I love the Main Street program in Michigan. I think they're doing great things. I think that we're all having to have creative solutions around historic building rehab. So we're looking to domicology and deconstruction and other uses, alternatives, anything but demolition.
Mm-hmm. Moving forward, Canlin Frost asks, how can a person with a 9-to-5 job effectively assist preservation objectives in their town?
Well, we always need volunteers and voices for preservation. If you have a 9-to-5, but you still feel that yearning to give back your specialty, your area of expertise, your talents, your interest in preservation, you could serve on a number of boards and commissions in your local community. Maybe if you wanted to do some side consulting in historic preservation at night, if you have young kids, it's challenging. I feel that. I have 3 little kids. But that's just something to get that fulfillment and preservation, is maybe just starting to get a sense of your community and serving on a commission or a board and being a preservation voice on that.
A lot of communities also have within their municipal websites, they'll have a listing of not only what those boards and commissions are, but what the openings are.
Right.
Those are, you know, and municipalities are always looking for their citizenry to assist in the process of making the municipality work. And so I defy anyone on this webinar to go to their local municipality, or maybe it's next door, and not find an opening somewhere. But definitely, I mean, those needs are out there, and municipalities would be glad to have you.
Right. Go forth and spread the good word.
and preserve.
Yes.
The next attendee asks, your students are the next generation of preservationists, and how are they doing? Are there jobs available?
There are. In my students, the greatest honor of my life, other than my family, being a wife and a mother, the greatest honor of my life is teaching my students. They have positions. They are the historic preservation component of the interior design program at the School of Planning, Design, and Construction at Michigan State. Preservation wasn't at the forefront for a few years. I feel like we're starting to, because preservation is a huge sector of the building construction, built environment, we're getting it back. We're putting it on the radar of students, and a lot of them, I always say, raise your hands, what type of interior design, because that's the program I teach in. What type of interior design do you want to do? And about half of them will say new construction, hospitality, schools, hospitals, hotels. But by the end of the semester, I'll say, how many of you, what do you want to do? And they'll say historic design, historic period appropriate interiors and whatnot. So I think there's jobs. I can tell you one thing is that the students, the interior design students coming out of MSU are super savvy in their SketchUp, in their Revit, and all their design software skills. And that is something that I don't see in the field of historic preservation. We don't see a lot of interior designers coming into the field. And I think that this is a great new avenue for preservation, is mixing interior design and historic preservation. And I mean, these designers are creating professional schematics and renderings and floor plans, and what could this space actually be? And they can operate on the fly. So a vacant space, if you need a commercial storefront space layout, look no further than some of the ID students at MSU. So to answer your question, I think there's a great skill set in having interior design in the field of historic preservation.
Excellent. Moving forward, Canlin Frost again asks, as a historic restoration craftsman looking to get involved in preservation restoration, are there special licenses or certificates that I need to have in order to do this type of work?
I think that you're going to have to, if you're going to do actual physical work in our trades, that you're going to have to get your builder's license and other licensures through LARA, or Licensing and Regulatory Affairs department within our state, within state government. So to answer your question, yes, if you're going to be executing and doing hands-on work, and then you'll have to get those kind of permitting or permits or licensures.
All righty. Anonymous also asks, since you come from a trades training background, are you concerned about how the pipeline looks for being filled with well-trained craftspeople, and do you see a path forward? I know, coming from the conference 2 weeks ago in Detroit, I'm forgetting the
APT.
the TI. That was one of the seminars, was developing that pipeline, because we lost the school system basis for those trades training programs, and we need to get that back. You can have a great living being a tradesman in any number of things, and especially within preservation, but I don't want to hijack an answer from you, so I'll let you at that one.
Oh no, I am piggybacking on what you're saying. No, I think that a tradesperson in Michigan, there is a pipeline of work. What I'm seeing is that right now there's not enough. There's a shortage of people that are working on job sites. So even speaking from my own experiences, is that we need to connect some of these construction teams with more, filling them with more preservation trades. So I've just reached out to the AGC of Michigan and getting more connected with the tradespeople in Michigan and bringing them into preservation, bringing them into the fold.
AGC.
Right.
What, that's an acronym that people might not know.
Okay, so this is it's a general contractors kind of construction coalition here in Michigan. And so I think that they are being placed on a lot of just tradespeople are being placed on a lot of new construction. We need to bring them more into the fold of preservation trades. So I think there's some kind of I don't know if it's a gap in how do we link these people together, but I know that a lot of my job sites currently there's two-folder problem or not a shortage of people, even though the person that asked the question said there's a pipeline of tradespeople, there's a shortage of people, there's a lot of work, and building materials are quite high right now. So we have a few variables that are happening. I feel like people there's a worker shortage all over. And so I'm trying to make some inroads right now with other larger coalitions for construction to bring them into the fold with preservation jobs and work. And I need help with this. So if you're interested or any people that are connected with larger trades or union groups, I would like to get connected with you. Reach out to me, please.
Excellent. Yes, that's a worthy cause.
And realtors too. I mean, I want to be cognizant of our time, but realtors, I want to get in a room of realtors too to talk about incentives. That's another group that I'm trying to get behind. If you're going to sell an old building or an old house, know what the designations are and the incentives, and that can help you with the sale. You can close a sale knowing that, hey, maybe your future buyer wants to tap into some of these incentives for historic properties.
Exactly. All right, moving forward, we have 3 more questions. Ann Beakey asks or comments, excellent points about connection to sustainability, restoration and adaptive reuse, as well as preservation of materials are all essential to better sustainability and environmental practices. What state or federal policies or other policies are there that encourage this understanding? And she thanks you for your presentation.
Thank you, Ann. I would say right now, I am by no means the expert on the federal policies that are coming out, but I do look to my sustainability specialists and saying for guidance on this. I can say that there are incentives through the Department of Energy, through housing and urban development for sustainability of historic buildings. I think that I look at things like Center for New Urbanism, other what do I want to say? Other kind of federal groups that are being voices for planning and preservation and sustainability for guidance. Right now, I think that the best we have, the number one case study that we're looking at is San Antonio and Green Preservation Institute, Green Lab Institute coming out of the National Trust. But I'd love to talk with you further, Ian, about I know you're a sustainability person, so we need to get together and talk about some of the efforts coming down from Washington.
All right, moving forward, another anonymous attendee says Diane Van Buren at Wayne State is an early advocate of training students in deconstruction techniques. She teams this with a makers program she heads. And do you know of her work?
Yes, I do. In Detroit and Metro Detroit. Excellent work. Thank you, Diane. It's been a while since we've connected, and I appreciate you being on the webinar today and love to learn more from you that I can use in the classroom as well.
And the last one, at MSU, it's Andrew Northrup who's working with FIT at MSU, and I'm sure he would want to hear from you. And that was from an anonymous attendee.
Thank you so very much.
All righty, that brings us to the end of the questions. I would just like to make the announcement that next month's webinar will be January 26th, 2023. The topic will be Bringing Back the Acres, the restoration of the Frank Lloyd Wright designed Pratt, Epstein, and Meyer houses. Registration will open soon. Thank you again for attending today's MHPN webinar. Jessica, thank you for your time. It was a very good presentation. And I will say you have an immense amount of knowledge, so we're lucky to have you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Happy to be a part of it today and look forward to connecting with you real soon. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you.
Have a great holiday season. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.